I think we are still at a way of thinking overall, which still thinks, oh, A is broken, I'll just give it that, and and the doctor-patient relationship is about how clever I am as a doctor to figure out what you need, rather than actually giving you my time and you may heal without any object.
Before we dive into this fascinating conversation with Robin Monotti, I want to share some exciting news with you. Robin is going to be joining us as a speaker at Camp Out this year, taking place between the 10th and the 13th of August at Braziers Park in Oxfordshire. Robin's going to be giving a talk and screening his film, The Book of Vision, which we'll hear all about in this fascinating discussion, which we created at the Better Way Conversation in collaboration with Glenn Young at Bright Light News from Canada. So sit back, tune in to this amazing discussion. And if you'd like to meet Robin and take part in 4 days of talks, workshops, entertainment, music, conversations around the campfire, great food and nature, then please join us over at campout.live. Reserve your ticket today and join over 200 people who have booked in the last few weeks. And I hope to see you there. Thanks very much for tuning into this podcast episode. Over to Robin Monotti.
Hi from Bath, England, everyone at the Better Way Conference. We're here today with
Astin-Gregory on the Time Limit podcast.
Yeah, we are collaborating today, Glenn Young from Bright Light News, and we have the special honor of being here today with Robin Monotti. Thanks so much for joining us, Robin.
Thanks for having me on.
Excellent. So we were talking about the way that society has gone now with scientism versus science, and we're talking about how people's values shift. And Sir Francis Bacon talked about 3 ghosts. You have the ghost of the cave, which is in your own world, sort of like Plato's cave. What you see in your own shadows, in your own world, is able to change your values or the misperceptions you have and the beliefs you have about life. Then you have the ghost of the marketplace. You have to earn a living. So this is why many people didn't or did take the jab. And some people decided, I'm going to lose my livelihood and speak out. Then you have the ghost of the group, which again is society, the groupthink pressure. We want to know, what are your thoughts about how we got here?
This is exactly what, in a way, where I think the film that I will show a couple of clips at this conference, Better Way Conference, comes in useful. Because I do think that the seeds have been planted a long time ago, roughly in parallel with the Enlightenment project, the Industrial Revolution. When we look at, let's say, even anything, but let's say even scientific experiments, the issue about confirmation bias. So let's say you start to live in a world where you make machines, Industrial Revolution, so you focus on then what happens is that you see everything as an object. So you see an illness as an illness of a body part rather than maybe an general unease and in existing for whatever reason. So I think that this has been a slow process, not simply for the last, 26 years. Or Dr. David Martin said that, the patents for coronavirus vaccines and for coronavirus spike proteins have been around for, 20 plus years. And so there's nothing new. But I think we're talking about a few hundred years. And in that example, I would just like to say that one word is objectification. So if I see you as an object, and if I see you as made of different little objects that are in relation with each other, and I say what you say, this bit hurts, I don't see you saying this. I see a part of you that needs to be fixed. And so I think, an object needs to be, let me think up another object, and I'll think up something, and whether it's a tablet or an injection, and then I'll say that will fix that. And I think we were very ripe for that way of thinking. And the problem is that I think we are still in that way of thinking. And that's why I'm a bit skeptical about science versus science. Or, even if one of them is scientism, that is belief and it's not backed by real evidence. I think that it needs to happen on a different level. And so the first step would be to not see each other as objects, but see each other as human beings who genuinely feel when we feel good. And we feel good in relationship, in understanding, empathic relationships with each other, but also with the greater world we live in, and ultimately with ourselves. And with ourselves as, living, existing being, with all the issues that we need to overcome, because it takes time to overcome certain issues and to be really rooted in who we are. Because of the focuses that you mentioned, the ghost of needing to earn a living, very little time ends up being dedicated towards, let's say, the know thyself, but from a spiritual level, or to the relationships that we may need to have beyond our immediate circle in order to heal things that we don't really understand, but someone else that may be a doctor, maybe a psychologist, maybe a priest, or maybe another figure that can come into our lives, and they don't necessarily do the healing. You do the healing in that relationship because they give you time and because it's a reflection of your own humanity that you see. So the empathy or the time of the other person, you end up realizing that that's what you need to give to yourself as well. So I think we are still at a way of thinking overall, which still thinks, A is broken, I'll just give it that, and the doctor-patient relationship is about how clever I am as a doctor to figure out what you need, rather than actually giving you my time and you may heal without any object.
It's really fascinating on a couple of levels. Firstly, on the element of looking at the pain, the individual aspect, the object, if you will. There was recently a paper that came out, or an article that explored how, since the kind of rise of the pharmaceutical industry that targets very specific ailments, there's been this rise still in systemic disease and systemic illness. And the question was posed, what's going to be the solution to this systemic problem? But the way the question was posed is it was still looking at it as an object rather than a whole. And I thought that was a fascinating piece, because it shows that the paradigm shift that's required has not happened. They're looking at this bemusing question that we've got this reduction in some disease, but we've got this new systemic reality that's unsolved by this proliferation of pharmaceuticals. I'm curious to know, from your perspective, how do we then go from the object to the whole? How do we bridge that gap?
With the other ghost that you were mentioning, which is the ghost of the group, in a way we need to exit that, and that's the only way, because unfortunately, because of the technology, the mass communication technology, if you're just tied into the group, ultimately there will be some degree of fear that will come in, and it will make you do certain things which may not be in the interest of your own health, including worrying too much about what's going on in the outside world, which we can all do, given the courage that we have to openly face the brutal reality of what has been happening in the last few years, if not longer, and the awareness that it's not over. That needs to be managed, and it can only be managed when we all find a way to manage ourselves and our time in a way that we can distance ourselves from that and the group. But to do that, I think we need to go to a place which society doesn't really encourage us to go in. A place of a form of, I would like to call it a form of spiritual isolation, when we are not in relationship doing it with each other, when we're doing it with ourselves, so that the ghost of the group is no longer dominant over us, and the other fears become manageable. And that's ultimately, we always tend to want to convince people of our beliefs, especially if we think that they may be in danger. So we say, I want to save you. But ultimately, the most effective way is to lead by example. And so if we are able to find a place of peace within ourselves, even sporadically, given the whole chaos all around us, I think that will somehow translate as a model of being towards others as well.
I think this is what we've seen this past few years, is this disconnection from ourselves. And we've been seeing this slowly rolled out into this groupthink where, at its worst, we were locked down and isolated. The vaccinated could not be with the unvaccinated. They didn't want us to talk, but we're seeing this through the automation of industry. Bank tellers now becoming ATM machines, cashierless supermarkets. Everything seems to be going in a direction where everything is objectified, everything is reduced, to disconnect us from ourselves and then have more messaging come into the forefront, right? We were locked in our homes for 3 years, some of us, and subjected to constant fear-mongering. It was like a stock market ticker tape, just COVID, 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 here come the numbers, right? And this is the difficult thing, is that people are so inundated with the ghost of the marketplace. I have to earn a living, right? How do I have time to look at this data and listen to these other voices that are being deemed conspiracy theorists? This is one of the biggest problems that we have, is the propaganda that we're seeing here, that's so deep that those who are most propagandized look at the people who are speaking the truth to be the misinformation experts. So is there a way that we can approach people?
Well, I can give you an example, which is to do with the film called The Book of Vision that we produced, which is about the history of the doctor-patient relationship. Because it does say what we're talking about now, but it doesn't go in a direct oppositional framework. Also, from a moral perspective, it doesn't say that, anything that's technological is bad and anything that was relationship-based before is good. It explores it, shows the pros and cons of those sides, but ultimately it shows that there's humans that are operating within these parameters, and that they can find a level of intuition that is able to heal themselves, and they can connect to the past, to history, to culture. So I think culture for me is fundamental because of the guiding areas. And even if we talk about, let's say, spirituality or religion, I don't think it has to be whether it's your guiding belief or not. I think it is a cultural background that exists. And I think pretending that it's not there at all and not learning from it, it's a poorer way of being that exposes you more to all of these fears. So it doesn't mean that one needs to jump to being fully fledged believer in a spiritual or religious dimension, but it just means that that you become aware that it can have healing capacity just to learn about it and just to inhabit that dimension. Because the problem is the dimension that we're being made to inhabit is the one that is scientism in a way dominates. And even if it's science, it kind of dominates. And I think we need to find another one, or other ones, or many other ones, which are not that. And so in practical terms, I had someone who had this shift within their own family. They didn't see eye to eye with the whole issues of the last 3 years, the so-called pandemic, the so-called vaccines and lockdowns and all of that. So they were not talking about this issue at all. I said, why don't you watch the film, the Book of Vision, because in the UK you can watch it on video on demand on most platforms. Why don't you watch it together? And he said, no, I can't do that. Everything, whenever I go anywhere near that, it's trouble. So I said, okay, I just listened. I didn't say anything. And then he came back to me. He decided to give it a go. I didn't force it. He decided to give it a go. And he said, you know what? I watched it with my family members, so we cannot talk about anything. And everyone loved it. And the reason being that it's not in a direct confrontational way. And it also shows a historical background that is fundamentally based on reality, but not in an oppositional I'm right, you're wrong. It takes you in characters, in human stories. So I know that it's possible through film. The problem is that this film is not going to be promoted specifically for that reason. So I can talk about it, but very few other people will. And also it stands apart from the majority of the filmmaking production today, which is very loud, very action-oriented, they're sort of full-on roller coaster type of entertainment cinema, whereas this is the opposite. It's slow, it's thoughtful, it's poetic, it's philosophical. So I think it's the side that we need, but it's a side that is not promoted, and actually it's looked down upon because it's not the kind of fast speed entertainment that we see today as the dominant form. I don't think any of this is an accident. I think all of these areas are fundamental areas, and I think the areas of art specifically to do with communication goes a little bit beyond the scientific discussion, which you kind of have to have a specific mind to want to engage in it anyway, right? Whereas in other areas, I think it's a bit easier, perhaps also because they operate at a subconscious level as well. So ideas get changed not in such a direct way, and they don't get changed towards what I know, what I want them to change to, but they get changed because they acquire complexity ultimately. And they acquire complexity because you show things in such sort of grey areas that people have not thought about. They only thought that medicine and the doctor-patient relationship is what you get today. So how many people know that it was totally different? It wasn't how it is today. That the doctor used to be, also the psychologist, the dream interpreter, the almost like the confessional character in someone's life. So it had all of these roles that led to healing, and then we divided them into different ones. But for a while, there were missing areas, and still these divisions are not particularly helpful. So one solution is to look at art, to look at poetry, to look at any other area that is not so easily placed on an oppositional level, I think.
I would like to draw some of these threads together. It's interesting how the film and what you've discussed here, referencing Age of Enlightenment, because I've, in my thinking, looked back to that period as well. And what I'm about to say is a very gross oversimplification, but it feels to me almost like the Age of Enlightenment represented a almost divorce between religion and science, or spirituality and science. And it's like, okay, you're going to go that way, you're going to go that way. The fact that this path emerged during the Age of Enlightenment, this kind of materialistic, reductionist approach, which over time I think has resulted in this very compartmentalized approach that you described, how the doctor used to have these different hats, different roles, and now it's very much segmented, going right into the point that you said it's objectified. We're now looking for just that thing. We're not going to look at the whole and what influences that. But in the context of the point around scientism, which is like a belief system, it's like a faith, I'm curious whether that separation almost led to throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and it left a God-shaped hole or a void that has since been filled by the manifestation of this scientism, which takes on the role in a way of a religion. And we saw it throughout the pandemic with the way that the vaccines were almost treated in this godlike fashion as this savior who's going to, science is our savior. And it was almost that relationship that you can look back through history as seen through things like the church or religion. Do you think that's played out in a way? Well, I'd be really curious, kind of, you're looking at that from a kind of philosophical sense.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely what happened. And one element that has been eradicated in that step is that it's really two belief systems. They could potentially coexist and be in conflict with each other. The problem when the latter one becomes dominant through the Enlightenment, let's say, materialist view, which is if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. and that eradicates so many elements of what it is to be human. And as Malone says, that's not science, because you would need to do a lot of tests to try and prove that only what you can see exists. And most of those tests would fail, because we could probably bring in so many examples of things we can't really see, but that they do have an effect on us.
Well, one that grounds us a lot is gravity.
Yeah,
Great electrons of light that we can't perceive. Right. Sound, we know that there's things beyond our senses.
Or, even so certain feelings,
Indeed.
Thoughts, and all the area of healing that I was talking about in relationship. You can't really see it that directly, maybe over time. So the shift that happened in this situation in which the religious dogma had become too dominant, and therefore as a rebellion against it, that world doesn't exist anymore. Only what is material exists. The problem with that is that whereas in the religious dogma, whatever it is, there is a justification, or there is a narrative to do with morality, which is very clear and very codified. So it's not up to you and me to debate whether it's better to sort of, to lock up 3 million people in order to potentially save one person, or whatever, inject all these people so that one person it doesn't become this kind of utilitarian equation, mathematical equation where I ascribe value to certain lives, and it's all kind of based on conjecture ultimately. Whereas in what happened before, which is the religious worldview, there is a strong element of morality. So in that jump, the baby with the bathwater that's thrown out, it's the entire principles of morality have gone. Then they come back in as post-rationalization. So you need to do this for the greater good. But that's all very ambiguous. There is no codified sense of what is the greater good. How greater good for how many? Is it really the great? So it becomes a kind of very very fuzzy morality that serves certain beliefs in scientism, but it's not really that clear, and we don't share it ultimately. That's the other problem. We don't really share that vision that morality is what we all want. So it throws morality apart, says only what scientific exists, or what I believe the predominant science. However, science is based on error and skepticism. So you're trying to hold on to something which keeps on running away from you. So you ultimately have got nothing to hold on to apart from the voice of the scientist on TV, or the voice of... So it doesn't really work, because there's no real moral grounding for it. And therefore it opens people to total manipulation on any aspect that you say, this is the current science and this is the greater good. So I think it's highly problematic, because it allows both scientism and groupthink to try and dominate without any real opposition. Now, the counter argument is, but haven't you seen how many religious figures have pushed these arguments as well? So how can you say that could be anywhere near a solution if that's as corrupt? Well, that's when we have to be able to recognize the difference between a religious figure who now believes in scientism rather than their own religion, and one which instead has still within them the real core and center, which are those moral belief systems and that view of let's say creation of sorts, that wouldn't necessarily delegate to a lab and to someone to sort of fix your body in an external way, but would actually based on you following some kind of inner voice towards knowing yourself, knowing your place in the world, that ultimately by becoming yourself, you heal rather than by, needles and injections. So unfortunately, scientism has become so dominant that it's taken over most of the organized religious organizations in the West. Not all of them, but most of them have been taken over, apart from minor pockets of resistance that are still there. But that's not what it was. That's not the moral belief system that it was. That's a new one that's acquired from scientism in order to replace the previous one, but it doesn't ring to me as it's got any real cultural baggage. I was, before doing film, that maybe with the film I really did the same. I was teaching, apart from being an architect, I also taught at university. I taught architecture at the time where the whole issues of sustainability became the common speak. But I was there when crossing over when it wasn't, and when it really became the dominant thinking. And then we offered us an alternative, which, okay, sustainability, that's very good, but let's look at cultural sustainability. Let's look at something that if you do it, it can actually last over time, rather than the new fad of what's sustainable. Because then, again, you're a slave to the latest view of what's, like this view that CO2 is bad for you. It's sort of this latest, we never had it before. Suddenly Al Gore says it in 1992, and then suddenly we've got sort of decades of the latest fad of what's of. But where's the culture that should hold all of these things? It's gone. It's gone, and it just becomes the latest sort of dictate from the scientism establishment. So the solidity that was there before at the moral level, I think, has been lost with the Enlightenment on the area to do with what's to be with fully human. That's not to say that science should be removed. It's we have gained that area, but it's become too dominant, and it's become too dominant that whenever we talk about other things, they are seen as mad ideas. The idea that, for example, you could operate someone surgically with no anesthetic purely by hypnotizing them. It's, there are people doing it in some hospitals, specifically one in France. Instead of a full anesthetic, you hypnotize the patient. Not everyone is able to do it, but that doesn't quite work with the whole Enlightenment, because you can't really see it that well. Or there are examples in some uncontacted tribes of telepathy, for example, that people have been managing to communicate without speaking the same language. But all of this does not fit with this worldview. And a lot of that is even to do with healing.
I'd like to pick into their subjectivity and postmodernism, and how that's led to an even further blurring of the codification of moral value, the hijacking of moral, the corporate hijacking.
I think the problem is that in this shift from a dominant religious worldview, where everyone kind of knows what the dominant ideology is, and that everyone knows it's based on morality, whether they operate with it or not. It's the same as now. Religious figures operated outside of it then, they operate outside of it now. But that's humans for you. But at least there was a cultural baggage, let's say baggage, that was passed on, that was quite clear what the values were. So it was less open to total manipulation according to the late. It was a more longer project. It was more culturally sustainable over a longer period of time. What we have now, it's not culturally sustainable for the majority of people. It's not.
Yeah, so I suppose in order to get to that wrap-up point, my curiosity is how could that gap be fulfilled? That's a 2-hour conversation.
Well, I think to use language, but to not always fall back into the scientific discourse. That's not to say that it should be repressed, but that's that any opportunity you have to make reference to something which is outside that scientific logic, I think it would balance out that dominance. And that's why I don't think that talking to people who you may want to have a debate on, who may have a different view on that level of data and science is helpful, because I think it's more helpful to actually relate on other levels, and then maybe it's easier to understand that people should have a voice on how their body, whether they are their body's sovereign or not, rather than the state. But that discussion can happen, I think, on a different plane.
I think you hit on a great point there, and it was magnified and apparent for everybody during the pandemic. There's two ways to talk to people. You can speak to them emotionally or logically, bring the science and the data. But when people are in an emotional state, when they're fearful, they don't want to hear data. They want a solution, i.e. the government during COVID. When somebody is in that logical state where they want to hear data, and then you come at them with, I'm terrified, there's going to be a disconnect. And you talked about how you connected with your mother, about meeting her where she's at. And I think that's part of the solution, is for us to have that empathy and compassion. You know, if they want to talk on a logical level, let's meet them there. If they want to talk on an emotional level, let's meet them there. But I think that's the bridging there, is being able to meet somebody where they're at.
Have you seen that video where there's a girl with a nail in her head, and the man is just, she's saying, I'm in agony, I'm in pain, I don't know what's causing it. There's this the video's got this physical nail in her head. And the guy who's with her, again, it shows kind of masculine, feminine energy in a way. The guy's there to say, I've got a nail in your head, let me take the nail out. But the whole story is it's a simplification, but it shows that what's lacking is the empathy to connect with the pain. But what's also interesting, and I talked to my wife about this, she said, first, she wants to feel heard and understood and that her pain is recognized, but then she actually wants to be supported in having the nail taken out.
Yes.
So, and that's really interesting, because firstly, I think when we're meeting people with data, we're not empathizing with their current state of mind. But I also believe the opportunity, once we do that, is to help them to move from that pain. But they don't want it to be told how to do it or directed or persuaded. They want to be supported.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a very different energy to directing, because none of us like to be sold to.
Yeah. Yeah.
We buy, but we don't like to be persuaded. And it's almost like we try, and as you said, Robin, that it creates a confrontational state. It just fire with fire. And if someone's in a fear state, they're going to further retract into their state of fear. And at that point, it's game over. We've got to feel into the fear and help them come out of that fear and come back to a stable point where, at that point, there may be an invitation to explore. But then, without imposition.
And this is what exactly the doctor-patient relationship, at least the film shows, would have been like once. It would have been helping someone to do their own healing. Also, they also would do medical malpractice and mistakes at the time. But overall, the philosophy was, especially in the doctor we chose, there probably could have been other ones, but that you do your own healing and the doctor helps you by entering a relationship with you. And the opposite reverse is also true. If that relationship fails, if the trust fails, it's more difficult to heal. So what you talked about in a particular relationship is valid in all relationships, and is valid even more in a relationship with someone who you enter into a healing relationship like a doctor. And that happens also at the level of language. And why that's important is that the moment you start to use the sort of medical jargon, you're creating a distance. So that's what we're doing when we use the data with other people. We're creating a distance from that relationship. So the great thing is that at the time, there was a similar knowledge, or let's say way of talking of how the world was based on certain humors or certain phlegms or certain, and this was quite literary and everyone shared it. Now we would say that's not how we see the world from a materialist point of view. But the great thing about it was on the same plane. So it wasn't a hierarchy at the level of words. And that's a starting point. Instead, now we've got sort of the white, doctor overall. We've got sort of the illegible writing to prescriptions. Then we've got a few words of some pharmaceuticals that, you kind of hear what's in it. The doctor knows I don't. So all of these steps create distance in that relationship, which makes it more difficult for you to have the empathy and stability to heal. Actually, it can be quite scary. You're in a clinical room, someone wearing white, they write the name of something you don't understand. Then when you get it, it's like a package with all sorts of, kind of excipients and ingredients that you don't read. It's a scary experience, isn't it? Imagine if it was very, very, it's a room like any other room. They're dressed like you. They talk like they would talk to you if you were out for lunch, and everything is like that. But they really listen at the same time. You'd go out and you'd probably heal a lot quicker. That's the paradox.
One thing I hear is acknowledging. I think every human being at base wants to be acknowledged. Whether you were unvaccinated through COVID, or vaccinated, or vaccine injured, whether you were a public health official being attacked or the media being attacked, everybody wants to be acknowledged. Nobody ended up on a psychiatrist's couch because they didn't get a Ferrari, right? It has to do with the relationship that we've been in. And what you're talking about with the doctor-patient relationship is to acknowledge, again, the healing mechanism that the body has itself. And everything has been abandoned this way and moving towards a more reductionist, disconnecting style of worldview. And I think we're all in agreement that we're honored to have people like you come to the forefront to help us put that connection back, put the holistic side of the world back into the picture so that we can connect again and see through, what really is clown world that we're living through right now.
I mean, it brings context and texture to the wider problem. That's the important piece. We're breaking free from the patterns that we've been discussing. We're moving out of the objective part of just looking at the sole piece of the problem and zooming right out and saying, how do we see the whole terrain? How do we see the whole map? At every level, the spiritual level, the emotional level, the psychological level. Because in the absence of that, we're not seeing the whole frame.
And you see, I think that with these conversations, with, maybe cultural offerings like the one that we did in the film, maybe there can be more throughout other areas. With these cultural offerings that look at this problem, because the thing is, there's very few films on the doctor-patient relationship, if any, apart from this one, in a kind of sort of feature element. If what we talked about was talked about openly in society and maybe the media gave space to it, it's very unlikely that people would have believed the stories that we were told, even when the fear card was played. It's most people say, well, that's an objectification. Well, stay at home and it's a body. It's saying the body doesn't heal. People would be critical at the TV and say, no, I'm not going to stay home because that's not how I heal in relationship with others. I need to see others. I need to be in nature to sort of center myself. I need my spiritual self. Of course, that's not going to work. I'm not killing someone. I'm not going to kill anyone. If I smile at someone nice to them, I'm going to heal them. So do you see what I mean? If this was common parlance and if this was societally spread, it would prevent the belief of that people would go along with certain dictates from above. The perpetrators would try it, but people would just sort of say no, and that it would be over. That's why I think it's fundamental to be able to talk like this about these things and not say, oh, we've got the right science and they've got the wrong one. The shifting of the discourse is probably more effective as a sort of antidote to the top-down restrictions of freedoms, because we understand that's not what heals us.
Amazing.
Hopefully our conversation has actually piqued people's curiosity about your film. I think it's important that we share how people can see that.
Yeah, well, it's called The Book of Vision. It's got Charles Dance in it, and you can see it in the UK and Ireland, on Apple, on Sky, Amazon, Google, Rakuten, and I think I'd like to see it as a potential tool to do what we talked about now, and also to bring people together who may have felt apart in this area, but bring them together not in denial, but bring them together in complexity and in relationship, and understanding that that's ultimately more important than arguing about whether something works or doesn't, which is an object, but the relationship works.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Robin. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's conversation with Robin Monotti. If you found this conversation as insightful as I did and would like to meet Robin, as I mentioned at the beginning of today's podcast, you'll have the opportunity to meet Robin and others at this year's Camp Out gathering at Braziers Park. So to reserve your ticket, go over to campout.live and come and meet Robin, spend some time with us, exploring the issues of our current unique times, and importantly, start to look at solutions and how we can move forward. You'll have the opportunity to watch Robin's film, see him speak, and take part in 4 days of workshops, talks, wellbeing activities, music, good food, conversations around the campfire, and more. So head over to campout.live and join us at this year's Camp Out gathering. I hope to see you there. Let's get together around the campfire. I can't wait to meet you.